Audio Jungle.
Mr. Bamford, thank you very much for your ability and presence here. You devote your life to protect the human rights, to defend the freedoms and privacy on the internet. Do you believe that we are living in a world with more freedom or with more fear?
Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here speaking because your organization has done far more than almost any other organization in the world in terms of helping promote internet freedom. So your organization is a model for the rest of the world. And to answer your question, it's sort of an irony that as the internet expands, it gives more opportunity to more people in more diverse places, from Africa to Asia to Americas and Pacific, everywhere, to communicate interactively like they've never communicated before, for free and as much as they'd like. They could read newspapers and places that they've never heard of, and they can communicate with people that they could never imagine of communicating with. So it opens up an enormous amount of freedom. On the other hand, there's organizations such as in the U.S., the NSA, which is trying to do the most it can to find ways to tap into that or to use cyber warfare and things like that. So on the one hand, it offers enormous amounts of freedom. On the other hand, it's another opportunity for governments to try to make their own use of it for their own purposes. And that's what I've been writing about for many years, is the efforts by organizations like NSA to use the internet for their own purposes rather than for freedom and for international communications.
Mm-hmm. With all those collateral effects on privacy, on the freedoms and civil rights on the United States after the Snowden revelations, do you think that's a concrete chance for a real reform on the U.S. legislation and especially on the NSA surveillance programs?
I'm not really an optimist. I've been writing about NSA for 30 years, actually more than 30 years. And NSA is almost a world to itself, and its main goal is eavesdropping, just plain eavesdropping. For decades, the NSA violated U.S. law by eavesdropping on American citizens. They said they weren't going to do it again, and they did it again. So I don't trust the NSA to be a nice, good agency and not do those things. So the alternative is for other countries to find ways to prevent that kind of thing and not depend on the NSA to obey the law. So the way to do that is by organizing, such as what Brazil did by bringing lots of countries together, putting more attention to encryption that helps defeat NSA by using encryption, and by developing ways independent of the United States to communicate. In other words, by developing the cable, such as Brazil has developed from Fortenza to Lisbon, and developing ways to use communications satellites so that they are encrypted and are less acceptable to NSA. So the bottom line is, I think countries have to assume the worst, that NSA is going to do whatever they can to get their information, and then act accordingly to try to secure your communications as best you can. I think Brazil is taking a lead in doing that. Again, nobody really realized how invasive that NSA was until these Snowden documents, but now that they've come out, it's an opportunity for Brazil and other countries to build up their sort of defenses against that. I think there's been more whistleblowers that have come out because of Edward Snowden. There's more revelations that have been coming out in different places, and I think he was inspiring. On the other hand, the government is trying its best to discourage whistleblowers by creating a great deal of prosecution. So it's going to be a battle, and I think by showing that you've actually changed the laws in the United States, thanks to Edward Snowden, and actually around the world, with Brazil also, that inspires people to want to make a change. And that's what human rights is all about, is by people sort of risking things in order to help other people who don't have any rights.
Yeah. We know that the NSA has a technical capacity to break almost 100% of the encryption protocols. Do you think that we should invest in a new generation of the encryption protocols and try to make the decryption process more financial costly, as a kind of strategy to protect the communication on the internet?
I think encryption really is the answer. NSA does have an enormous capability to break encryption. They're working on a new computer now, a very secret computer in Tennessee that it'll be the fastest and most powerful computer ever built. And the whole idea is the faster you build a computer, the faster you're able to break encryption. However, the more encryption there is, the more NSA has to pick and choose what it is to focus on. So obviously North Korea and China and Russia and so forth are far more important targets, far more important in terms of intelligence activity to NSA than Brazil. So if everything is unencrypted, then there's no problem getting Brazilian communications or any other kind of communications. But if countries all start encrypting, then they're going to go for the countries that are the most important, and that puts countries, like I said, like North Korea and so forth, way up there on the priority, and then the friendly countries like Brazil way down. So that would help in terms of protection. So I think encryption really is the answer. Mm-hmm. It's not foolproof, but then again, when you figure that they have to prioritize, breaking Brazilian communications would be far down the list.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I completely agree. And but the question is, the encryption tools are still complicated for the end users, the day-to-day basis. The people are not, the tools are not user-friendly. Do you think this is a big challenge for the new engineers, for the software developers, for the companies as well? How to develop user-friendly encryption tools, user-friendly encryption interfaces too?
I think it's almost like anything. When something starts out, when the internet started out, it was very complicated. It was not very user-friendly, but now everybody is communicating on the internet. So the more people that get involved, the more simple it gets. I had never used encryption before Snowden. I've been a journalist, a writer all my life, and dealt with sources, and I never used encryption. And then after Snowden, I began using encryption, and it was very easy. It's just you just hit a button, and it's all encrypted, and you exchange your keys with somebody, and the whole thing takes a few seconds. And so it's very simple, but it's very important for companies like Brazilian communications companies to develop end-to-end encryption. So when they send it up to a satellite, mm-hmm. or when they're sending it over a fiber optic link, it's encrypted from one end to the other. So if somebody gets in the middle
exactly.
and tries to...
The man in the middle.
Yeah, the man in the middle, then it makes life very difficult for them. And again, the whole idea here is to make life difficult for the people who are trying to do the eavesdropping, because then it's difficult to go to somebody else, or they go to the more important people, and I think that's the key to encryption. So it's important, first of all, for the companies to develop it for end-to-end encryption, and then for people to develop it for person-to-person encryption, which will be slower, but the companies have to lead the way.
Mr. Bamford, you mentioned China. China became a big player at the geopolitics end, a big country, a big economy. And we know a little bit about the China capacity of surveillance because they are a very closed country. And when we read the articles on the press, we saw many evidences that China is building a surveillance infrastructure to spy foreign countries, including US. Do you think that we are living in a real cyber war?
Well, it's definitely a time when cyber war is a reality. For example, in the United States, they've actually created the first cyber command, which means that we now have a cyber army, a cyber navy, and a cyber air force. The United States has been one of the most aggressive countries in terms of developing cyber war activities, and China has been extremely aggressive in forming cyber war capabilities. One difference, however, is that there's sort of two aspects of cyber war. One is where you're eavesdropping and wiping out somebody's computer, like happened with Sony a while back. That's one form of cyber attack. Another far more serious attack is what's known as a cyberkinetic attack, where you're actually destroying a physical object.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened for the first time when the United States sent what was known as Stuxnet to these centrifuges in Iran, in a nuclear enrichment facility. And for the first time, it actually destroyed these pieces of equipment. So that was sort of the launch of a new type of war, and you can use that to destroy lots of different things, not just centrifuges, but you can actually bring down an entire dam. All you're trying to do is get whatever that object is, and all these objects are basically connected to the internet, and you get an object to basically commit suicide. In other words, if it's not supposed to go over 150 degrees, you get it up to 300 degrees. If it's not supposed to vibrate, you get it to vibrate. At the same time, on the monitors, everything looks normal. So the two things is you make it look like everything's normal, and the second thing is you destroy the equipment, and that's where cyber war is going.
Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's a question of power. And some people argue that the decision-making process of the multi-stakeholders organizations, multi-stakeholder forums, it's still slow. It's very slow. And when we talk about cyber defense, cyber war, it's a role of the government. How to fight that argument?
Well, the problem you present is one that is very difficult to solve, because the government is saying, always says, in the U.S. it's the same way. They say that the decisions that involve the military, cyber warfare, those kind of things have to be decided unilaterally by the government and by the military and so forth. And it's very difficult to get civilian input into it. Multi-party stakeholders are non-existent in the United States when it comes to that type of thing. So I could understand why it's a difficult problem in Brazil, but I think the key word is stake. Everybody has a stake in this. It's not just the military, and the problem with the military is they're sort of one-dimensional. They only focus on winning battles or whatever, and the internet is a far more diverse object. It's like saying nobody should have any say on what happens on the ocean except for the military. Well, you can't say it that way, because you have ships that sail, passenger ships, you have cargo ships, you have all kinds of interests that are not just military. It's the same way with the internet. It's not just cyber warfare or the military eavesdropping, everybody has a stake, and that's why you need multi-stakeholders in deciding futures of the ocean, of space, of internet.
Audio Jungle.